We welcome you to Kingdom Culture. We're so glad to have you with us. And today we just want to talk about what it means to hold space for one another. Now, you'll agree with me that 2020 was a very unusual year. None of us ever saw what was about to happen when we were in 2019. And 2020 has been a tough year for most of us, if not all of us. We found that we've been spending a lot of time at home, and our homes suddenly seemed a lot smaller than they once were. We found ourselves bumping into each other, space became a constraint, some of us are frustrated, and rightly so. We just don't have enough space, right? We all like our little space, we all like our little freedom. So today I just want to share a little bit about holding space for ourselves and for others, and why it's so important to learn to do this well. So what is holding space? Holding space is learning to walk alongside one another without trying to judge and fix one another. What happens many times is we want to fix one another. We want to impact the outcome of another person. And so what happens is we end up being very judgmental with each other's words and actions. So when we talk about holding space, especially in trying situations like we live in today, it's about journeying alongside one another, reserving our judgments, not trying to fix one another, not trying to impact the outcome, not making others feel inadequate, incompetent, and so on. It's essentially learning to give each other room to operate. Now, when we look at the Bible reveals a God who in his creative wisdom not just creates space, but he creates the space with boundaries in place. So for example, in the book of Genesis, God creates the heavens and the earth, and then he puts boundaries in place. He separates the heavens from the earth and he puts boundaries in place. And they're already fixed by God. But God just doesn't create the space with boundaries, he also fills the space. So after he created the heavens and the earth, God said, "Let there be light." And light came, and then there was light and darkness. So God creates a space and then he fills that space with his creative power. God also sustains all that he creates by the word of his power. So we see three things when we look at who God is, his nature. He creates space, he fills the space, and he also sustains the space. Now, the Bible also teaches that you and I are created in the image and the likeness of God, which means his nature and his character is already invested in us. Many times we don't see it because we don't perceive it like that. But the truth is, we are created in the image and the likeness of God. So when we talk about holding spaces, if God is the one who creates space, fills the space and sustains spaces, and we as part of his creation also need to know how to demonstrate those attributes, how to create space for one another, how to fill that space with warmth and love and acceptance, and how to sustain it. I hope you're getting the picture of what I'm talking about, of why it's so important to hold space both for ourselves as well as for others. So I'm going to just give you 4 practical ways in which you can begin to hold space for yourself as well as for others. And next week, we'll look at 4 more practical ways in which you can grow as a space holder. This is so vital for us to understand and practice. So here goes. One of the first ways, and I just want to remind you, these are just guidelines. It's not an exhaustive list. You can possibly add a lot more onto this list. But these are just some of the things that I have learned just looking back over 2020. So here's one of the first ways. Holding space. Allow people to use their wisdom and their intuition in a given situation. You'll agree, we are all people of experience. We all have an accumulated share of wisdom. So when you're holding space for somebody, allow them to make choices in any given situation with whatever wisdom they have. Learn to be a facilitator. Do not control their outcome. Because when people are free to make their own choices, they're also prone to make mistakes. But through those mistakes, they're able to learn and they're able to grow. So the first practical way is allowing people to use their own wisdom and intuition in a given situation. The second way, think about this one. When somebody is going through a troubled time, and 2020 is a classic example, many people are going through depression, thoughts of suicide, uncertainty about the future, so on and so forth, fear syndrome. There's so many things, complex emotions that people are going through. So if you're trying to work with somebody, if you're trying to help somebody, only give them as much information as they can handle. See, when you and I are going through something very complex, the brain cannot process too much of information. So if you have been called into somebody else's life to help them and to walk alongside them, only give them minimal instructions. Give simple instructions. Do not give them more information than they can handle. When you give more information than people can handle, what happens is many times people end up feeling inadequate and incompetent. And if you give too little information, what happens is many times people are confused because they don't know what to do. So it requires discretion to know how much information can I leave with this person? Can this person even handle what I'm about to share with them? So that's the second way that you can begin to become a wise space holder for yourself as well as for other people. The third thing, which I already touched upon, allow people to make their own choices. Many parents especially want to try and control the future of their children. And I think many Asian parents fall into this trap. We see the success or the failure of our children as directly proportional to our success as parents. Now, I want to dispel that myth. It is a myth. When you allow children, when you allow people to make their own choices, you also end up creating an environment for them where they are able to flourish. Ultimately, it's all about humans flourishing. That's what the God of the Bible desires for you and for me. He wants us to flourish. He wants us to experience our full potential the way He has created us. So allow people to make their own choices. Do not intervene when it's not required. Be a facilitator. Offer guidance when required. And this is so vital to remember. Ultimately, people have to learn to be responsible for their own choices. Every time you and I step in and make choices, we take away somebody's decision-making power. And that is detrimental to their own growth. They don't grow. And this is a trap that we all fall into. Do not take away somebody's decision-making power. Leave it with them. Let them take ownership. Let them be responsible for their choices. You be there as a facilitator to guide them as needed. So that's the third thing. Allow people to make their own choices. And lastly, in today's episode, here's the thing that's helpful to remember. The other person's success or failure does not depend on your intervention. Somebody else's success or failure does not depend on your intervention or lack of it. Sometimes we make it all about ourselves. And this is something that we all fall into. It's a trap that many times, if we're not careful, we will fall into. We live in a performance culture. And like I already mentioned, many parents want to see their children excel. And there's no harm in that. But when their children fail, many parents take the failure as a reflection of their own parenting. And I want to tell you, parents, don't take it personally. Their success or their failure does not reflect on your parenting skills. You need to learn how to hold space for your children. You need to learn how to hold space for your spouse. You need to learn how to hold space for your colleagues in the workspace and your friends. So their success and their failure does not depend on your intervention or lack of it. What you can do is be available for them. Be available to offer support. Be available to offer encouragement, guidance, as and when it's required. These are 4 simple, practical ways in which you can begin to grow as a space holder, both for yourself as well as for others. Next week, we're going to pick up this topic of holding space for ourselves as well as for others, and I'll share with you 4 more ways in which you can begin to become a wise space holder. I hope this was helpful, and as you think through and you reflect on what you've heard today, I also want to encourage you, take a step towards practicing some of these tips and guidelines that I've left with you today. Because until you practice, until you are intentional with some of these things, it's never going to happen. If you want to see the results change, you've got to learn to practice these things as you journey through life. So God bless you. I hope these lessons learned in 2020 were helpful to you. If you do have any feedback or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. God bless you, and we will see you next week.